Man of Steel is certainly turning out to be an enigma for Warner Brothers, both a success and a failure at the same time, with critics, audiences, and comic book professionals evenly as well as bitterly divided over the quality of the film. In fact, Superman Birthright writer Mark Waid, on which Man of Steel is largely based, made comic book industry headlines when he ultimately came out against the film on Saturday. I've included a link to his review in the video description. Now, standing at the eye of this storm is Christopher Nolan. When I went to the movie Saturday night to see The Internship, it's solid but a rental, I was both surprised and impressed by the huge lines for Man of Steel. You could feel the energy in the air, actually amped up by the mixed buzz, as audiences were driven to find out for themselves if Man of Steel was as good as they'd hoped or as disappointing as what seemed an impossible number were saying. Does this hope come from the House of L? Nope, it's the House of Nolan. When I saw all those people lined up to see Man of Steel, it became clear to me that in Nolan we trust is a very real sentiment. But as another comic book saying goes, with great power comes great responsibility. And I have some concern that Nolan isn't making this connection. This concern actually started when I saw The Dark Knight Rises, which some of you have been asking me to revisit for the last few months or so. Like Man of Steel, that was a film with great casting and brilliant ideas, but it was 2 or 3 movies shoehorned into one, with characters ultimately getting shortchanged and ideas left underdeveloped. And knowing that Nolan had not wanted to make a third Batman film, especially after Heath Ledger's death, but that was the trade you had to make with Warner Brothers to get Inception greenlit, I began to feel that perhaps Nolan was no longer emotionally invested in the world he had so impressively created. How could the man who cleverly took inspiration from Michael Mann's Heat and crafted a fully realized reimagining of the Joker go on to make such careless mistakes as Batman entering a tunnel during the day and exiting it minutes later at night? As I said, a man whose heart just isn't in it anymore. I mean, I gave The Dark Knight Rises a 9 pretty much purely for nostalgia for The Dark Knight. And part of what I did like about Man of Steel was that I felt going forward it could be a way to revisit the world of The Dark Knight. And I suspect a lot of people feel the same way. But how long can said nostalgia last without a full and proper recharge? Further evidence of Nolan's heart no longer being in the game is that he didn't fight for quality when it came to Man of Steel. Last week it was revealed in an article in The Hollywood Reporter that it was between Zack Snyder and Darren Aronofsky to direct this new Superman flick. However, Warner Brothers studio chief Jeff Robinov lobbied hard for Snyder, as he's been grooming him since 300. And despite Watchmen, Legend of the Guardians, and Sucker Punch all failing to deliver both at the box office and with audience favor, Nolan agreed. Does that sound like a man hell-bent on making sure these movies turn out well? Furthermore, while he took David Goyer off of screenwriting duty for the rest of the trilogy after Batman Begins, he handed the reins back to him for Man of Steel. Why not at least enlist his brother Jonathan again, who co-wrote The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises, as well as The Prestige and Memento? Jonathan Nolan is working hard to make his own name, and Man of Steel would be a great chance for him to fly solo out from under his brother's shadow. However, Christopher Nolan's shadow is pretty inescapable. I took my dad to see Man of Steel for Father's Day, and watching it a second time, I amused myself by imagining a world's finest movie, and how Henry Cavill and Christian Bale would interact in both their personas. Although, what's Batman going to do if there's no kryptonite? That's kind of his signature move. But if the DC cinematic universe is going to succeed, it needs someone guiding it who's all in, not simply keeping a hand in out of some loose sense of loyalty to Warner Brothers, or even worse, for what I'm sure is a very large paycheck. What do you think? Are you happy with Christopher Nolan's level of involvement, or do you want him to either double down or step aside for new talent? And does Warner Brothers need to assign an executive to oversee the DC cinematic universe and impose some kind of quality control, as Kevin Feige does for Disney as head of Marvel Studios? Write your thoughts down below. I'm Grace Randolph, and this has been a Movie Bite. You can watch more right now.